Welcome. I want to introduce you to Appreciative Inquiry. I'm Dr. Dietra Hawkins. I like to let people know that I'm trained as a clinical psychologist. I've done a lot of work in the recovery community. I'm a qualitative researcher. I really love collaboration and trying to build things in a different kind of way. I'm a mom, I'm a wife, I'm a Black Catholic. I grew up in Memphis, Tennessee, and my pronouns are she and her. I think it's important in this work that we start off with introducing who we are and how we've arrived to this work. So today I want to share with you how I think about appreciative inquiry and how we will be hopefully supporting you in an effort to just start some different conversations. I'll also talk about the role of creating cross perspectives and leave you with an activity to develop and have some relationships by doing interviews with each other and maybe out in your community. Before I get started, I always start by sharing with you some basic tenets on how we come to all of our work that we really understand is related to cultural competency and creating more cultures of inclusion and belonging. So the first is to just acknowledge that everything we do has a cultural context. So even me joining you now via this video has a cultural context. It's also important to think that we're in a process together, that we're not necessarily focused on where we are arriving only. It's about both. We have to both think about how we're on this journey and where we're going. It's not an either or. The other thing with this work is to be aware of our filters, and what I like to let people know is that there's a filter that says I'm good, and it comes with a hand motion. So if you find yourself getting to that place, that's okay. We want you to breathe and know it's going to be all right. We are going to be here together. Along with that, it means that it might get a little bit messy, and I want you to be prepared for that. We want to give you some skills for how to have those conversations and let us know if it is messy. We also want you to know that our work is not about creating a cookbook approach, meaning that we're not going to talk about this is AI and this is how you use it. I actually believe that using appreciative inquiry can enhance anything that you do, and that these conversations that we would be asking you to try and have with each other, you can have in the grocery store, you can have during a staff meeting. They can happen in all kinds of different places. The key with this is to understand that all of us have a role to play. Sometimes our role is to be curious, right? Sometimes our role is to just be quiet. Sometimes our role is to tell our own story, to be willing to share our own truth and be vulnerable. The last thing in all of our work is to talk about the role of blame. And what we really want to do is invite you to pause on the blame. We want to think about accountability, absolutely. We want to think about ways that we can be active, absolutely. But the blaming and establishing a person who's wrong actually gets in the way. And so we want to pay attention to how big all of the things that we're doing are and how we can be active in this process. So we want to, with this, invite you to your role. Your role will be to contribute your lived experience, to share stories, to practice self-care, to encourage others to share their stories, to be their best, and to, most importantly, really think about how you can have an open mind, consider ways that we can analyze information differently, and to imagine what the possibilities are. So when you have that filter that's like, hold on, that's not what I experienced, that we can breathe and say, well, tell me more about what you are seeing. What this means is that we're all going to have a different perspective. So in this little image here, it's helping us think about, from one perspective, it looks like a 3. From another perspective, it looks like a 4. Neither person is necessarily wrong. If we're not open to that, we could really get ourselves stuck in just fighting each other and not get about actually using what we have in front of us. So our goal is going to be inviting you to think about 3 questions. What is true? True may be painful, right? What is good? Good could just be that people are showing up. What is possible? Possible will often be those stories of innovation that maybe have happened over there, and we're going to look at how it could also happen in your environment or in your community. So I want to take a moment to just share with you what traditional change, what traditional approaches really often are experienced by. So many organizations believe that the first thing you need to do is get top leadership involved, or that we need to start at the bottom. Our hope is that we're going to actually invite you to start with the inside out. Start with who's showing up, and then look for both the bottom and the top support. Traditional approaches to change, when they only do top down or bottom up, tend to be less effective, as you can see here, tend to focus all of their energy in trying to get people to buy in, or they experience that change is very slow, and that ultimately, as you're actually trying to implement, things get broken down. So we want to take a different approach and think about how we can find out what is best and build on that. To not ignore the things that are problematic, to actually practice asking questions as an art form. So David Cooper-Ryder helps us with this work and will be giving us a framework that we can build on. We will share a clip of a video of him actually sharing what appreciative inquiry can be and how it's worked in change management. But a core part, again, is just to say, what do we have, instead of looking at the ditch of what we don't have. So that tends to be more of a deficit focus, and we want to think about what our assets are. This is another quote that I like to just start off with, in understanding that we have to be deliberate or intentional in talking about what everybody understands and what gifts everyone is bringing to the table. So when we work together, we'll be asking you to talk about what is true, good, and possible. I often like to mention that there's a film or movie out there that coined this term, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And unfortunately, in our positive psychology world, we understand that if you only focus on all the negatives, that's what you're going to find. So we want to help flip this around and outweigh those negatives, because you need at least 5 positives to outweigh 1 negative. Part of our work is helping you establish a bank of questions. So here are a few. What are you passionate about? What gives you joy? What helps you get up every day? Those are just a few questions, but over our time and working with you, we'll be developing a whole list of different questions that are moving us away from asking things like, well, what's wrong? Or let me tell you what the problem is. This is based in what is called the 4D or the 5D cycle in appreciative inquiry. All of these questions just help us stay in a mode of thinking about what is good, true, and possible. So the first is that we're going to define what we're looking at. So let's say that one of the things we want to do is have more equity in our environment. We will do that together by co-constructing what should be. So that is the design focus. We will do some work to dream with you. So questions that invite people to say, well, I wonder what might be if we were to, really move in the direction of our passion. What might be possible? What we want to do out of that is to actually go and discover, have there been times that you've lived in your passion? Or can we go back in this organization and think about when things were really going well? What were the specifics that allowed those things to go well? That helps us to discover what is really giving life, and we create a space of appreciation. And then we look to sustain. What are the things that we need to adjust or learn? How do we change our policies so that we are supporting the design, the dreams, and this discovery that we've all gone through together? So one more part that is important in this work is this idea around dialogue across perspectives. So my colleague David Stainer and I have done a lot of work with communities, and what we try to do is actually invite everyone into the room, which might seem a little chaotic, but actually can be a lot of fun. So what we do here is we invite everyone's perspective, and as you can see on this slide, what we'll have is a central question: what can make our environment more equitable? And that we'll ask the students, we'll ask the administrators, we'll ask the policymakers what they see as important. And if we're all in this discovery phase together, then we often will have the different pieces and everybody will know what they need to do to actually make the environment more equitable. And what this does is that it doesn't put all the responsibility on one group. It actually creates shared responsibility when we have these shared perspectives across the different groups. So I want to just get back to one more thing, which is asking questions. The art of asking is part of our work. So you may actually have the answers, but if we don't ask and find out what other people think, we won't know if we have shared perspectives. So our core questions are going to be what's helping or what's making a difference here? What would you say is getting in the way or could be better? And we follow that up with what we call a resilience question, which is what gives you hope or helps you feel like you belong here? All of these questions are designed to have people share a story with you. I want to share this slide because it's one that most of my colleagues like the best. And it's an easy way of thinking about shifting our questions or flipping, what I like to say, flipping problem solving upside down. So most of us are familiar with the fixing side, right? That we have to identify what the problem is. We have to do a process of, determining the root of the problem. We're going to all come together and brainstorm and analyze what we should do, and then we develop an action plan. What I want to invite you to consider is that we can do both a plan, but we can also embrace a process of what's possible by asking some different questions. So our appreciative inquiry process will say, again, what here is making a difference? What do people here actually show up for? We'll imagine together, what do you think it might be like if we, for example, really had inclusion, really had a culture of belonging? What that then leads to is what do we need to change? What are the things that might be getting in the way? What is a policy, or maybe even not a written policy that's getting in the way of us living out what we think and know actually gives us life? And then together designing what will actually make a difference. So this slide is just a quick way of paying attention to how often in your mind you're thinking about fixing and finding a way to pause on the fixing. I want to just highlight how important it is that we avoid a problem spiral. So most of us have been involved in conversations where we just talk more and more and more about the problem. And we get really good at understanding why something doesn't work. When we understand what doesn't work, doesn't necessarily give us an idea of what we need to do that will work. So we want to invite you to have a conversation. Just 20 minutes. It might go longer, about what are the things that actually do help and how do you know? The way we do this is to put the person in the center. So we listen together, we ask about what someone's passions might be. And maybe they haven't been engaged in that passion for a long time. So we'll invite them to say, well, what do you think it could have been? Or what could it be now? We try to find ways to have opportunities that we could do something about that passion. We redefine a resource. Resources are important, and resources should be something more than money. So often relationships are a resource, and often information is a resource. And then we face our challenges together. So there are a number of principles to appreciative inquiry, and this part can be kind of, theoretical. When we work together, we'll be able to pull these apart. So I just want you to see them, because what you're actually going to do is get engaged in a conversation with another person, and we want you to practice this whole process. So the first thing that we come to when we think about appreciative inquiry is that in every group, wherever you are, something is working. And if we ask that, or we go in with that expectation, it's more likely that we can actually find it. We also know that what we focus on is going to become our reality. And if we focus again on that problem cycle that we just talked about a little while ago, then we'll find the problems. But if we are intentional about looking for the things that make a difference, then we have a greater likelihood of being able to replicate that again, which means that our reality will be created in the moment. And we want, from a cultural competency perspective, to highlight that there are going to always be multiple realities. So in this work, it's really important that we are not looking for one reality or even two, but multiple realities, and to know that that reality will change over time. And the way that we go about this process is to ask a whole series of questions. So our asking helps us to identify what's working, what could be better, where people are finding their passion, where they used to have a passion, where is the art and possibility of doing something different. All of this is about putting the person, the wellness in the center instead of having the problem in the center. You'll see this is something that we replicate over and over and over again. The last few assumptions is just to recognize that all of us carry things forward that we feel comfortable doing. If you ever notice that you ask someone to do something and they don't do it, and you find out later it's because they weren't competent or feeling confident about doing it. So we want to invite people in to carry forward the things that they do well. And it's really just the natural way in which we learn. If you think about the way a child starts off kind of teeter-tottering, when they're learning to walk, when they fall, they get back up and then they correct it. And then that's how they keep going. We do also, in our process, want to encourage you to bring the best forward, that we have choices about what we carry forward with us. We want to find ways to value difference and to be mindful of our language. So again, paying attention to how often we talk about wanting to fix things, and maybe think about, I'm curious, how do you understand this? Or what's the story behind that? I'm noticing, sometimes the way I like to work with people is say, I'm noticing your passion. Can you tell me more of the story about why you're passionate about it? Just using different words like passion and notice and curiosity helps with those conversations. All right, so we're toward the end and just getting ready to talk about why this is important. So we want to have one more piece that I want to introduce to you, which is a SOAR process. So we're doing appreciative inquiry, and many organizations think about doing strategic planning. And we want to introduce SOAR as a way that you can do some strategic planning using an appreciative approach. So as you can see, on one side, we have what traditionally happens, and on the other side is what we can do from an appreciative approach. So just really quickly, in our traditional sides, we tend to analyze the problem. You've heard us say this over again, and find ways to try and manage people being overwhelmed. We want to embrace a different approach that builds on those pieces, but also moves us into the direction of what can be and is actually happening right now. So we're creating action. We're thinking about what are our strengths? What are the opportunities that we have to do something about our strengths? And then a question that gets left out a lot, what do we aspire to? Before we talk about what we will do, what the results will be. In this, we're going to focus on what's best. We're going to find ways to engage all different kinds of perspectives. And we're going to be invited to really think about what are the results? How will we know we're actually being successful?